Honored to have with us today Rabbi Jacobson, who we asked to give some practical guidance on how we are meant to guide, strengthen our students, on how to channel their and our own emotional turmoil that we all feel based on what's happening, and following the approach of Torah Chassidus and the Rebbe Sayras. Thank you very much for joining us today, Rabbi Jacobson.
Thank you. We are all united in our shock and our being overwhelmed, frankly. So we have to acknowledge and begin. I want to start with we said Tehillim, and I concur with all the powerful words that Rabbi Silverstein and the Shliach from Eretz Yisrael shared. But I think it's important as much as possible to begin with our prayers, our hearts and souls are all with the Eden in Eretz Yisrael, the men, women, and children. Kedem Kol, push it the tragic atrocities. Hashem Amokim Yemnachem Eskem B'Seich Sharav V'Tzin Yerushalayim and their families. This is a scar, a wound that will not be forgotten. At the same time, the brachas go out, especially to the Tzahal, people standing Mesiras Nefesh on the front lines, sacrificing their lives for Ali Eden. And though, as was mentioned, we're thousands of miles away, we're all in it together. Am Yisrael, as the Alter Rebbe says, we are Av Echad L'Kolona, Kulam Asimis, we're one body, we're one organism. And when one part is hurting, all of us are hurting. So I think just wanted to begin with those words, especially coming from a day like Simchas Torah. This should happen on Simchas Torah, which it itself is the celebration of Jewish indestructibility. That after all the Churbanos and after all the challenges, including the Chet HaEgel, we finally had Salachti Kidvarecha Yom Kippur, and that's why we dance in Simchas Torah. We're indestructible. So that should happen on such a day it just makes it so much more shocking. However, one thing we learned from the Rebbe, many things we learned, but when it comes to this is the time when we have to rise to the occasion. This is where you see who's who. No one should ever be tested. But this is when you want to talk about the power of Yiddish, Eden, of Torah, of mitzvahs, of Am Yisrael Chai, of Nitzchias, of Bnei Yisrael Lechalisam, Ani Hashem Leishanisi, Bnei Yisrael Lechalisam. This is the times. And what we see time and again from the Rebbe was mentioned the Yom Kippur War, 6-day war, every challenge, a big massacre, if you remember Malot, every massacre, every challenge was always turned by the Rebbe that we have to create even more light than all the darkness. All the Mivtzoyim actually, starting from Mivtzah Tefillin connected to the 6-day war, Mivtzah Mezuzah connected to the terrorist attack up north in Eretz Yisrael, Malot, and all the other Mivtzoyim were more or less connected to events in Eretz Yisrael, which is the center of our lives, and that we have to rise to the occasion, not just to grieve and share our empathy and our feelings, but also to share courage, conviction, strength. And as Rabbi Silverstein put it beautifully, as well as the Shliach, the bottom line is, like in the words of Rameir Premishlan, Amisugibun Eben, fountain nicht unten. When you're bound above, you don't fall below. What does that simply mean? It means Amunah, Betochen, that Hini Le'yonav Le'yishin Shemi Yisrael, and despite all our questions and all our challenges and all our difficulties, we forge ahead. Vayiso. We don't get stuck. Why? And what could have happened, what should have happened. We don't get stuck in finger pointing. We forge ahead. I say this not just to myself and to you. I say it also because this is what we need to convey to everyone around us. You know, in times of war, our children, our students, our friends, our colleagues, you know, the osmosis is very powerful. When people see fear, it affects us people that way. So we are sensitive and aware of what's going on, but at the same time, the Rebbe showed us the way that what we have to do is strengthen everything that gives us this eternity. So let's talk a little about that. What are the actual things that that give us that type of strength and actual things that all of us can do. And everything I'm saying here is not my own ideas. Take it straight from the Sikhs around the Milchama Sheshes Hayomim, as I mentioned, the Yom Kippur War, the Farbrengen, the Yud Gimel Tishrei Farbrengen, as well as Shabbos, as well as Chalamet Sukkot, the Rebbe Farbrengen then as well, and things that we can learn from the greatest of the greatest, the Rebbe himself. And of course, the Rebbe based it on the Derech HaTorah from all the years. Look, anyone that asks one simple question about Eden knows this. We're the smallest nation in the world. Atem ma'at mikol ha'amim. Yet we're the only ones that are here today. The great Roman Empire, the great Persian Empire, the great Babylonian Empire, the Egyptian Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Ottoman Empire. Go through all the empires, far more powerful armies than the Jews ever had, far more numbers, far more money, land, and so on. What they did not have was the Ruchnizdike power. They did not have the biggest weapon of all, and that's Amunah. And when it says in the Pasuk, Lo b'chayil v'lo b'keach, ki im beruach, is spirit. Noshim, b'schus noshim zidkonis nigel avesenim mitzrayim. Why the noshim? Because they had Amunah pshuta, that in addition to everything else, the Mitzrayim could not understand that. They thought the way to vanquish the Jews is to control the men, kill the boys. Don't let Moshe Rabbeinu grow up to be Mashiach Shel Yisrael. What they could not destroy is something that no weapon can destroy, and that is pure faith, pure Amunah, Pshuta, despite all odds. This is what we need to demonstrate to ourselves and to everyone around us in a time like this. So that's number one, that every war is fought on two fronts. There's a military front, and Eden are not, God, Rahman al-Islam, do not go like sheep to the slaughter. Yaakov Avinu prepared also for war. He didn't just daven. He didn't just prepare an appeasement, a bribe. He prepared for war. Thank God he didn't have to go to war. However, today, sometimes you have to do that. That's the military side of it. Then there's the spiritual side. You always find when the Eden fought Amalek, Moshe had his hands up, is Mispal Hashem. When the Yoav was fighting the enemies of David HaMelech, David was being Mispal and was learning and davening and so on. There's a side, the spiritual side to the battle. We are part of the war as well. It's critical to we know we're not bystanders. We're not just praying for them. We are part of the war. My father-in-law, Tzvi Hirsch Gansberg, Olav Shalom, he was in 1948. He was in America. He had come in 1947 with a few of his chaverim. They came to the Frierdiker Rebbe to learn here. They lived in Tel Aviv in Eretz Yisrael, originally born in Russia, but they came to Eretz Yisrael those years. As he would like to say, he said he was a Palestinian before 1948. Akaponim, when the war broke out, the independence war in Eretz Yisrael, his father wrote to him and said, you have two brothers here, Ichke and Label and Ichke Gansberg, those brothers, and your blood is not more precious than theirs. You have to come back and fight in the war. But of course, ask the Rebbe what to do. And he wrote to the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe responded to him the following. He said, who is an arik? Who's a deserter in a time of war? Not someone who doesn't fight, someone who leaves his position. If someone, for example, is heading the communications department, or someone in intelligence, or other parts of the military effort, they're already, if they say, I want to go shoot, that's not your job. Your job is another job. Everyone's dependent on each other. So he said, your part of the war is to stay here and learn with passion, with intensity. If you go away from your position, you're basically a deserter. So Meklal Lava Teshemeyahin. We are part of this battle as well. First of all, if anyone was of us in Eretz Yisrael, we would be the same targets, Rahman al-Islam, as every Eid. Second of all, as I said before, Allah Eden Zainates, we're all one. And finally, we fight the war with a Ruchnizdike thing. I remember by Yom Kippur War, I remember I was a younger bocher, the Hashkim V'Harev, to wake up earlier, to learn more, extra mitzvah, extra tzedakah. Obviously, the mitzvahs I'll talk about in a moment that have a special zgula for Shmira, and so on. So we are part of it, and we have to fight just like the soldiers fight, which means with a passion. The story Rabbi Silverstein said is a story that I'm hearing in different contexts all over. There's a Ani Yeshena Libe Eir. Am Yisrael, when we're pushed, people wake up. So this is an opportunity to mobilize, and I'm specifically using battle language, the language that Rebbe would use. We have time to mobilize ourselves, and we're not on the defense and just saying, "Oi, holding our fingers and wringing our hands and saying what's going to be." That's not an approach. The Rebbe told Rabbi Lau once, Aid doesn't ask what's going to be. Aid asks is what are we going to do? A victim asks, what are we going to be? At the end of Masechta Seita, the Friedrich Rebbe says that's also a klola. That as if we can't do anything. Only relying on Hashem, but Hashem gave us also resources. So we have both. Hashem's reliance on Hashem, but do something. That's how we behave. And that itself is empowering. When our children, and as I said, our environment, our colleagues, our students, see that, that means you go on the offense. The best defense is offense. Besides the self-confidence that it builds, it also actually has an effect. Simcha was mentioned before, so I'm not going to elaborate about that. Simcha, the positivity, but the actions, every action. It's interesting, we come from Sukkot. It says a Medrash Chassidus brings, Anon Nitzuchaya, the Dan Notzach, is part of the Daled Minim. Those are weapons. They're spiritual weapons. Simcha State, of course, is even a more powerful one. Again, we all have the questions, why? But the real question is, what are we going to do? And that's what I believe each one of us has to ask ourselves. You create an emergency meeting, exactly as they do in Eretz Yisrael, emergency meeting with your students, and say, what are we going to do on our end? And let people take on achlotas. Achlotas in Teira, in Aveda, in Milos Chasodim. So let's talk a bit about the actual mitzvahs. What are the things that Rebbe? Tefillin was the first thing, 6-day war. V'yora kolame yoretz, v'ro kolame yoretz, v'yora mimeka. That tefillin has a special segula. And we've seen it b'peil mamish, the times of war in Eretz Yisrael, they saw it as a weapon. They didn't know what it was, and it scared them, the enemy. So, of course, the hidur in laying tefillin for those that are already putting on tefillin, and encouraging every person to find 5 people to put on tefillin with. The second is Gula Mezuzah, which is Mitzvah Mezuzah. The Rebbe came out with the terrorist attack, in Ma'alot, which was essentially Mezuzah, Shmira. That's what it is. Shema Dalsis Yisrael. So that's a mitzvah that everybody can relate to. People putting on mezuzahs, be beidik mezuzahs. Obviously, tzedakah is always tatzal memovis. Tzedakah is always a zgula in these inyanim. And then, above all, which was mentioned, but I should reiterate again, achdus. Rachmana litzlan. I don't want to speak negatively, but when the Rebbe would bring the idea of achdus, talk about anshe Avshalom, even though they were the enemy, when they were united, the Eibishter blesses unity with berachas. And Rachmana litzlan, even the Tzad HaKedusha doesn't have achdus. I don't want to say the end of the sentence. Achdus is one of the most important dinyanim, especially in times like this. And everybody can look in their own hearts and understand how we can create more shalom in our own families, parents and children, spouses, communities, shluchim and shluchis with each other, and with strangers. That's a keli machzik bracha. No, again, I don't want to point fingers, but what was going on at Yisrael right before this? Terrible period. Von aller Seite. Again, I'm not pointing fingers. We all have to look at ourselves. That's what the Rambam says. So this has to be a major call, and it has to be stronger than any of the negative. That's how even though ma'ater dechahar becheshech, but the bottom line is the ava has to be stronger than the sinna. That's the rule. You show more ava than the sinna they have to us. That's what vanquishes the enemy. And finally, I want to say one more thing, which I think is vital. It was mentioned, I think, alluded to, but I'll say it very specifically. I'll call it in simple English, it's called clarity, moral clarity. There's so much confusion and disinformation. Just look at Rachmana litzlan, even Eden, who are marching Rachmana litzlan with the Tzatcha Keneged. There's such a distortion in what's going on. So this is a critical moment, especially on campuses, where there's so much misinformation and biases and active PR that unfortunately has influenced thousands and thousands, if not millions of people. I'm not going to say all their tinus, but basically blaming Israel. and even blaming Israel for this. So it's important that each one of us understands very well what we're dealing with here. There are times where you see good and evil, right and wrong. No one doubted what the Nazis were in World War II. There were supporters they had, and America for a while did not participate in the war, etc. But there came a point where it was impossible to deny. And when you have moral certainty and moral clarity, it gives you tremendous kayach. So we have to just establish one thing that's very clear here. You see the behavior, the tzad shekeneged, literally atrocities and war crimes. I'm not talking now even from the perspective of Torah now and religion. We'll talk about that in a moment. Also from a humanitarian point of view. I don't know who coined this line, but it captures it very well. That if the enemies put down their arms, there'd be peace immediately. If the Israelis would put down their arms, Rahman al-Islam, what would happen? It tells you the whole story, the entire story. And it's critical that we understand it with confidence and that we can share it and clarify people. Just study where the word Palestine come from. All the claims. We're occupiers. They're occupiers. Eretz Yisrael, Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, in the best-selling book of the entire world called the Bible, the Torah, the promised land promised to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov for their children. Then they went to Mitzrayim. And what happened? Occupiers in Canaan and all the Shiva Amomim decided to occupy. And they didn't have to fight to get back their own land. And this happened again and again and again. Most people don't even think of it in that way. They say, okay, the Jews needed some homeland after the Holocaust, so the Balfour Declaration and the UN. It's ridiculous. Yes, they confirmed it because they confirmed something which is a historical fact of the God-given land to the Jewish people. The Rebbe would emphasize many times that you don't even need the religious argument. You need Siman Shin Chof Tes. And what better proof of Siman Shin Chof Tes than what would just happen? That when you're on the gvul of your enemy, Al-Sfara, where you're a sworn enemy, and since 1948, Israel's been in a state of war because the enemies have declared war. So even if they come to you al-kash v'teven to negotiate commerce, trade, not war, you're supposed to mobilize because they're proven guilty. They've been proven to be your enemy. They're not your friend. This is an argument whether it's in France or in England or in the United States or anywhere in the world. What do you think would happen if some part of Mexico suddenly decided the insurgents into Texas, into southern United States and killed 1,000 people or worse? What would happen? Any other country. So it's important to have the moral clarity here. Additionally, says the Rebbe, in addition to Siman Shin Chof Tes, we have, of course, the first Rashi and Chumash, which we're reading. I don't know if this could say it has Hashgacha Pratis, obviously, this week, that the Goyim will come and say, Listim Atem. Exactly what they're saying. You stole the land. So you should tell them, and the Eibishter gave us this land. That's an additional point. The Rebbe always wanted to know that these are two separate points. That additional point, obviously, is important. Just mentioned Chvevusa de Milsa, my father, as a journalist. He was then correspondent as well for Yediot Achronot, which was the #1 daily newspaper at the time. In 1961, he was invited to the White House. Kennedy, JFK was the president. The Rebbe, my father asked the Rebbe, what should he say to him when he meets him? So the Rebbe told him, the Rebbe told him, he said, take a copy of the first Rashi and Chumash and take a good translation in English, have it laminated, and give it to the president and explain to him what this is. First Rashi and Chumash. America is, of course, a believing country. So with all that said, what we have here is that we are part of this war. And when it comes to war, you get mobilized and you take the offense. Our offense is a ruchnistic part of it. Obviously, anyone that has to help the Gashmis, this does not preclude that. People who are reservists and so on, we're all part of it. But nobody is absolved, everyone. And finally, the children. One of the things that Rebbe said, Tov Shalom Daled, was he said that, I don't know, he said, Doesn't know. I don't know what pushed me. That in the summer, I was kochen zichem mipi'elim v'yenkim yisad te'ez, the chinuch of children. And then the Rebbe used the words very rarely that he ever used this expression. Niva v'lo yoda ma niva. He prophesied, didn't know what he was prophesying on himself, because children play a tremendous role in this spiritual battle. So gathering, any one of us that has that opportunity to gather children, besides the fact what that itself does, it pierces heaven, and is our best defense. Mordechai did it in the time of Purim, and children were always at the forefront. It also gives strength to the children. People are asking what to tell our children. This is what we tell them, that the Eibishter created a world, there's good and evil in it. People can choose a b'charta b'chaim. Some choose the opposite. And when there is darkness, we have an alternative. We have an option. We're not left lost. We say Teda. We learn Teda. We say Tehillim. We give extra tzedakah. We daven more. We become better Jews. And we bring more elokus, more getlichkeit, more gutzkeit into this world. So obviously, there's so much more to say. You know, I don't want to overstep my time limits. I don't know the exact schedule, but I'm speaking as we're all in this together. I think this is probably going to go down to one of the biggest days in our history. Simchas Teda Tavshin Pei Daled. Someone pointed out to me that Tavshin Pei Daled, the pasuk Tavshin Pei Daled in the Teda, is I have to look which pasuk it is, but it talks mamish about the vanquishing our enemies. It's in Dvarim, I think Lamed Beis. Maybe someone can look it up. That this day will definitely go down in history. For some, this may be the biggest day, but it should be the biggest day not because it's the tragedy rather, but because it has woken us up in an unprecedented way to do what we have to do, especially regarding Shleimus Haaretz, as was mentioned from Yud Gimel Tishrei Sicha, especially regarding our pride and not have to feel that we have to answer to anyone's PR or to anyone's opinion, that Eden and Eretz Yisrael should do what it has to do. And V'nesati Shalom Ba'aretz, which is told in Imbuchu Kesei Telechu, the Eibishter should already have Rachmanis after everything we went through. Who needed this? The Eibishter should have Rachmanis, the Rebbe should have Rachmanis, and finally pour down all the brachas of complete Shalom with no casualties at all. This should be the last cry and the last loss that we should ever have, and we should march right into the Gula Hamitzis Vashlema that was promised us. That it's already long, long overdue. But we do our part, we march forward, we forge ahead, and we prevail as we've always prevailed.